There, nestled against his pulse, by Huthan. Chapter 4.
Alright team, good work, Ishiro says. He wipes a hand across his forehead. You all know what to work on, but training's done for the day. Get some rest. They all make noises of acknowledgement, but otherwise don't move from their slumped positions on the training room floor. Keith leans back against the wall and looks over the room. Paige lies spread-eagled on their back, eyes closed behind their glasses. Hunk sits a couple feet from her, elbows resting on his knees, head bowed as he takes deep, controlled breaths. Keith sighs. He should probably start his cool-down exercises too, but Allura pushed them extra hard today, and he can't feel his arms. He opens an eye to peek over at her, and if he had the energy, he'd scowl. She's sweating, sure, but just barely, and not even having the decency to gasp for breath like the rest of them as she stands there, talking to Karan. Hey! Something cold touches his cheek. Keith flinches, but then groans, leaning into the blessedly refreshing chill. He reaches up, blindly grasping at what he's sure is a juice pouch. It feels like a small handful of heaven, and he cups it in his hands, pressing it to one cheek and then the other. Well, okay then, someone says, amused. Keith tilts his head up, squinting. Lance is already bending down, sliding against the wall to sit beside Keith. He's drinking a juice pouch of his own, fingers squeezing the plastic. His nails are perfectly rounded, and the calluses of his fingers and palm are reddened from training. He took down twice the number of drones today compared to last week. Keith hates that he notices any of this. Thanks. No problem. Keith tugs the straw from its packaging and pokes it into the hole, or tries to anyway. His arms are too weak and flimsy, like wet paper. Pressing harder only seems to bend the plastic under it, and he should feel frustrated, but mostly he's just really tired and wants a drink. He stares down at his pouch. Why is this so hard? Oh my god! Lance says. Just give it here! Please don't make that face! I can't take it! What face? Keith lets the pouch be plucked from his hands, watching as Lance punches the straw through with deft fingers. He hands it back, and Keith eagerly grabs for it, bringing it to his mouth and sucking down an entire mouthful in a second. Lance puts a hand over his face. Your pouch! Your gummy hands! It's unnatural! Please, never do that ever again! I don't know what you're talking about. God, Keith would kill for another one of these. Lance looks at him, mouth twitching. Dude, what is it with you and excessive bodily harm? Keith flushes. He didn't realize he said that out loud. And how are you drinking that so fast? You're almost finished. And then Lance's hand is tilting toward Keith, and Keith blinks down at Lance's pouch, inches from his mouth. What? Here, says Lance. You can have mine. Yours was the last one, and I don't really like this flavor anyway. He gestures with the pouch, and the back of his hand brushes against Keith's gloves. The soul marks on his wrists feel like they're burning. Keith absently makes a mental note to wash his gloves. Maybe Lance was right about them getting gross if they've started giving him rashes now. The last of Keith's drink slides down his throat with a slick, sweet taste. He reaches out and hesitantly accepts the offered pouch. He mumbles a thanks and glances up to find Lance with his lips pressed together. Are you always like this after a hard practice? He asks. I almost can't believe it, but you're not at all irritating right now. Keith rolls his eyes, shifting away from the heat of Lance's body with a grumble. And you're the same either way. You mean incredibly handsome and witty? Lance grins. Not even in all those alternate universes Slav sees. Keith retorts, snorting at Lance's overdramatic gasp. You're just jealous! Lance sticks his nose in the air, eyes crossed. Keith gives into an impulse and shoves a hand under Lance's arm, wiggling his fingers. Lance yells, toppling over onto his side and rolling away from Keith's tickling. He pops up on his elbows a few feet away, scowling, and kicks at Keith's shoe. What was that for? Keith just sticks his tongue out and then goes back to slurping his juice, smug. Lance narrows his eyes at him, straightening slowly. But before he can launch whatever counterattack he's got planned, Paige's voice calls out,
You guys coming or what?
They both turn to see the rest of the team walking out the room, scrubbing towels over their face and neck. Paige raises her eyebrows at them and then stares at Lance pointedly. She grins.
Should I leave you too?
Nope! Lance jumps to his feet and Keith jerks back startled. Nope, that will not be necessary! We're coming too! Keith desperately needs a shower! Keith gets to his feet and since Lance is still looking away from him, jabs a finger at his waist, unrepentantly, just to hear Lance shriek again. Are you sure it isn't you with the awful smell? Paige groans and following back.
Come on, you dorks! Can't you do this later?
We're going! Lance grabs Keith by the shoulder, steering him ahead by a foot. When Keith frowns at him, he says, I don't trust you not to go for my ribs the moment my back is turned. Keith smooths out his face, eyes wide. I would never. Lance laughs in his face, loud and fake. Keith can see his back teeth. They're really white. Your poker face doesn't work on me, Mullet. Try again. I'm not trying anything, Lance. Don't you call me that. That's your name. I don't like the way you say it. Lance. 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 I won't cut you, Mullet. Don't think I won't. I thought your BR was a rifle. I'm the one with a sword. Shut up, Keith. Following a step behind, Paige pauses to slam her head on the castle walls. There you are, Lance says. Cheryl's been looking every... Keith grabs a fistful of Lance's shirt and hauls him into the closet, slapping a hand over his mouth. His ears strain to hear footsteps as he presses the door panel repeatedly until it closes. Lance makes enraged noises, thumping a fist on Keith's chest. Keith shushes him, eyes darting to the door. The noises stop, like Lance pushes his hand away, scowling fiercely. Dude, what the heck? He hisses. Why did you drag me in here? Are you hiding? In the janitor's closet? She was bent on me about our last mission for 2 hours. The only reason I'm still not getting my ears lectured off is because Corinne asked him about his eyeliner and I booked it the moment his back turned. Lance frowns. Oh, dude, really? You didn't even mess up that much though. Reckless as ever, but it turned out okay considering how it usually goes. Thanks, Keith mutters dryly. Did he send you guys? How did you even find me? Cheryl just said to keep an eye out. Lance shrugs. Kinda surprised I'm the one who found you. I thought you'd be holed up in Red, to be honest. Red's hangar is the first place Shiro would check, and if I was there, he wouldn't leave until I came out. Oh, right, Lance says. Hey, why didn't you lock the door? Don't know how. Keypad looks different from the ones in our rooms. Keith squints. And it's an old hand. I can ask Pitch how if you want. Lance turns to him. You do that? Lance snorts. You forgot! Shiro likes to lecture me too! I wouldn't wish that on anybody! He steps around Keith and puts a hand to the panel. I'll be back at 5. Hide behind something in case Shiro thinks to check in here. The door opens and slides shut after him, and Keith is left in silence once again. Huh. Lance looks up as Keith enters the kitchen. He clicks his tongue. Knew it! Dude, you tried way too hard! He pushes a plate of food across the counter towards Keith. Here, Hunk saved you a plate of food goo. Thanks, Keith says slowly. He sits down a chair away from Lance. What are you doing here? Just checking up on something, Lance replies. He stands, stretching his arms up with a groan. Whoop! I'm beat. I'm heading off to bed. Have fun eating, Mullet. See ya. Right, says Keith as he watches Lance leave. See you. Keith digs his nails in, scratching harder at the skin under his jacket. Up on the bridge dais, Alora gestures to a red planet, briefing them on a new mission. He should be paying attention, but God, does his left elbow itch. Maybe he's allergic to something in the weird mud he fell in 2 days ago on Janook. It was neon green and had things crawling in it after all. He pushes the sleeve up, frowning down at the inside of his elbow. The skin is dry and flaky, irritated to an ugly red-purple coloring. Scratching does nothing, and pinching it replaces the itch with pain for a second, but it just goes back to a burning prickle a second later. Dude, you're going to claw right through your arm if you keep that up! Keith glances over. Lance is still looking at the hologram, but his body is tilted slightly towards Keith, and when he speaks, it's a mumble at the corner of his lips. He probably remembers how they were scolded for bickering last time. Is there something wrong with it?
Yeah, it seriously itches.
Keith mutters, I'm thinking the mud on Janook did something to it.
Lance grimaces.
Ah! Hated that! I couldn't get it out of my suit for hours!
I threw mine out. There are extras in the hangar.
Ah, jeez, I totally forgot! Lance sighs, then perks up. Oh, hey, Corinne gave me this cream, though, for the rash those weird plants gave me 2 months ago. I'll give it to you. Maybe it'll help.
Thanks.
Keith smiles and then scowls down at his arm, kneading his knuckles into it.
Hopefully it'll get rid of this freaking...
Lance? Keith, are you two listening?
Alora asks, annoyed. They jump, faces failing and hands coming up to salute in unison. Yes, princess! Lance heaves an explosive sigh, sliding down further into the cushions. He jabs at his tablet, and when it doesn't give him the desired effect, kicks his feet up and twists violently until he's lying full body on the couch, his head a foot from Keith's thigh. He squirms, clothes twisting up into his armpits and hiking high over his back. He huffs angrily and yanks them back into place. Stupid game! He mutters, and the force of his glare could make Zargon pause. Keith fidgets with the corner of his own tablet, glancing around the room. The rest of the team's engrossed in their own business. Pidge and Hunk are bent over a disemboweled Galra sentry, whispering furiously. Alora is chattering with the mice. Karan is weeping as he watches a hollow movie, and Shiro is meditating in the corner like an old man. Lance curses again, giving the tablet a frustrated shake. Keith peeks at the screen, and it only takes a second to pinpoint what the solution is to the puzzle. Lance is pretty close to it, but maybe it's a case of tunnel vision that explains why he hasn't seen it yet. Another growl, and yet more vicious tapping. Lance looks like he's half a second away from throwing the thing across the room. There's a 50-50 chance Lance will just yell at him for this, but...
Lance?
What? Lance mutters, and Keith relaxes because the reply is not nearly as acerbic as he was expecting. Kinda busy moment! The name calling makes him want to roll his eyes, same as ever, but Keith shakes it off and points at the screen.
It's this part here. You had everything but this one.
Lance stares at Keith's finger, then at the screen, then up at Keith. There's no discernible emotion on his face.
Sorry, I just thought...
Keith edges away.
Never mind, I'm probably wrong.
Lance glances back down at the game and taps a finger where Keith pointed to. The screen lights up with a cheery tune and little streamers. He makes a thoughtful noise and tips his head back, staring upside down at Keith. Keith holds Lance's gaze, feeling so out of his depth that he's started sweating. Do you want to turn? Asks Lance. Maybe take a break from reading.
Oh.
Keith blinks.
No, I'm good.
Seriously, here! Lance levers himself up on one elbow and plops the tablet on Keith's lap, right over Keith's tablet. You can do me a favor and finish the next couple levels. My eyes are burning and my brain feels like mush.
But it's your game,
Keith protests. Lance waves a hand. It's not like Killbot Phantasm or anything. I'm fine with watching, dude. Keith's gaze flicks back and forth from the game to Lance, stretched out on his stomach beside him. He's propped on his elbows, legs crossed and bent at the knees, and he's looking at Keith expectantly. You gonna play or what? He asks, the corner of his mouth twitching. Keith replies eloquently.
Sure.
Lance just nods. With his head full of question marks, Keith focuses back on the game before him. He plays 5 levels, and he's hyper-aware of Lance's hair brushing against his arm the entire time. Keith doesn't know what's happening. It's been weeks since the incident with the ferriter, and he thinks he's going crazy. At first, he thought it was just his imagination that Lance wasn't as irritated with him as usual, but when Keith shot down a fighter ship right in front of Blue, and Lance didn't snap at him for stealing his targets, but instead hollered, "Nice one, Keith!" It had been enough to send him racing to find Hunk, because as Lance's best friend, Hunk should know what the heck saw for their Blue Paladin. Oh yeah, it's not just you. I definitely noticed that too, Hunk says.
I thought maybe you guys had finally grown up and talked like adults about that inferiority complex you both have that drives you to try and one-up each other constantly. What?
Says Keith. Never mind. Huck might think he's being sneaky, but Keith can totally see him snickering behind his mound of machinery.
Just, maybe don't question it. Take the olive branch Lance is offering. Lance hasn't given me any olive branches.
There's a loud clang, and Hunk swears, dropping down to the floor. He's not even visible anymore, crawling around and patting the ground.
Keith wishes him luck finding whatever he's looking for. Tools and scrap metal and junk food carpet every inch of the room. Keith, no, I meant be nice to him in return. What if he's sick?
A beat of quiet, and then gradually Hunk rises up from behind his desk, eyeing Keith from the corner of his eye. There's a blowtorch in his hand.
You think he's sick?
Keith nods because he's actually worried here.
What if he's been replaced by an alien? He hasn't made fun of my clothes in a month, Hunk. No mullet comments in weeks. Don't you think that's weird? Are you sure he hasn't said anything to you?
No. Hunk draws out the word and then presses his lips together. It does nothing to stop the wobbling of his chin.
Look, Keith, trust me in this. Lance probably just realized how dumb you two have been arguing all the time. Just follow his lead. The only time Lance has ever led me anywhere, says Keith, was into an invisible wall of a maze that shocked you every time you so much as breathe on it.
Hunk reaches up for the mask sitting on his head and pulls it down over his face. His voice, when he speaks, reverberates behind the metal.
Well, it can only get better from there, right?
Keith groans and turns on his heel to the sound of the blowtorch starting up behind him, and Hunk humming cheerily.
Lance, do you want to come train with me?
Keith's embarrassed to admit that Hunk had to coach him through that a dozen times before it stopped sounding
angry and like you just want to use training as an excuse to run him through with a toothpick.
Hunk smirks. But he thinks the effort might be worth it because Lance is staring at him with those huge blue eyes of his. Something like "please shock" written all over his face.
Keith wills himself not to go completely red. He can't help the ears, though. At least his hair covers them.
What? Asks Lance. The magazine he was reading hangs limply in his hands.
Training. With me.
Behind his back, Keith squeezes his fingers until the bones pop.
Why are you looking at me like that? I've asked you before.
Lance slowly stands, throwing the magazine to the side. Yeah, but it always sounded like a jab at my skills, then an invitation. Keith frowns.
It did?
Lance gives him a look.
Yeah!
Oh, sorry.
Lance waves a hand and slings an arm around Keith's shoulders, steering them towards the training deck.
No worries, I should have realized you were just being your awkward self.
Keith scowls, because that way it'll stop him from thinking too much about the weight of Lance against him.
I'm not always that bad.
Sure, buddy!
Lance snorts and continues before Keith can reply.
So what do you have in mind for today?
I was thinking hologram.
Okay, solve the choice. More terrain options to choose from. 1 versus 1 or...
as a team.
Keith says firmly. He doesn't falter when Lance glances over at him, but he does muddle over his next words.
There's something I think we could try.
Okay?
Their footsteps echo out of sync at first. By the time they come to a stop in front of the training room doors, they're walking in step with each other, and Keith's mind is out buzz. Lance still has his arm around Keith's shoulders. He can't remember if they've ever been in contact for this long before, other than when they were pushing and shoving each other. The lights flicker on when they step through, and Keith slips away to make his way over to the control panel. Lance trails behind him. He watches Keith punch in his selections for a moment, and then frowns.
High ground, maze, 20... Dude, that is way too many bots!
Keith hums.
Don't think you could handle it?
Lance freezes. Narrows his eyes.
I didn't say that!
I don't know.
Keith drawls, tapping in the last of the sim perimeters. He looks over at Lance.
That's what you implied.
Eyes locked onto Keith's. Lance slowly reaches around and jabs the blinking Set parameters button with excessive force. Keith smirks. Too easy.
The room groans, gaps in the walls sliding open and towering blocks of metal emerging from them. The air shimmers and the floor under their feet is now purple earth, baked dry by the sun hanging in a green sky. The gray walls and the metal blocks morph into rocky outcroppings looming over them on all sides. A huge indigo cliff stands before them, casting them into the shadows.
What is this, the Purple Grand Canyon? Lance asks in disbelief.
Keith snorts. It's not nearly that big or spacious. It's just a small rock maze.
Like a maze! Lance whines. Close quarters doesn't exactly do my rifle any favors.
You're not going to be down here with me,
says Keith. He points up at the cliffs.
You are going to be up there.
Lance blinks up at it, looks back at Keith. Keith drops into his stretches and Lance belatedly does the same.
You can see everything from there and move around easier too. I won't be able to see around the corners, and they're too tight and sharp to peek around without getting my head sliced off. So you'll do your sharpshooting thing and call out enemy positions for me. We don't have our helmets, but I'll hear if you yell.
He stands, raises his arms above his head, holds, and drops them down with a sigh.
The point of this is to get me to the end. Pretend I've got vital intel or something. I'm trusting you to watch my back.
Lance stares up at him from his crouch, one leg stretched out to the side. He holds the stance for a second longer before rising with liquid grace, a strange glint in his eyes. He rolls his shoulders and tilts his head from side to side, working out the kinks in his neck.
Keith can't look away.
You want me to watch your back,
Lance says, and Keith might be wrong, but he thinks Lance sounds pleased.
Yeah, I can do that.
Good.
Lance flashes him a teething grin and with a parting smack on Keith's arm, jogs over to the nearest cliff face and starts scaling the wall. His grip is sure, and underneath his sweats, Keith can just see the flex of his quads and his ass. Keith whips his head around so fast his neck makes a sharp crack and he winces. He squeezes his eyes shut and pinches the bridge of his nose.
Focus. No distractions.
He breathes out and decides that since it'll take a while for Lance to get into position, he might as well go through his stretches to pass the time. 7 minutes later, and he's bent in half at the waist, lazily letting gravity pull his hands down to lie flat on the ground. If he actually tries, he can usually lock his fingers behind his ankles. There's a choking noise above him, and Keith straightens, pushing his hair out of his face.
Lance, you get up, okay?
Did I get up?
From behind an indigo boulder, there's a flash of brown hair, and Lance raises an arm, flapping it in Keith's direction.
You know what? Never mind, let's just do this. I'm in position.
Keith shrugs. He unstraps his Bayard and activates it.
All right. Call it.
Commence simulation!
Immediately, 20 droids drop down from the ceiling into the canyon at various points. To Keith, it's like they fell from invisible rips in the sky. One lands directly in front of him, the single blue circle in its head, flashing. It falls into a ready stance. Keith smirks. The droid comes at him, and it's easy enough to dodge and lash back. He can do this in his sleep. A blow of his blade at the bot's torso, and it stops dead in its tracks. Keith doesn't wait for it to dissolve into a shower of blue, but rushes forward into the canyon's first bend instead.
"Two up ahead! Second turn!"
yells Lance, and Keith speeds up accordingly, taking the short distance to the next corner in 5 strides. He comes to a dead stop just before it, striking out with his Bayard, and instead of meeting empty air, he slices a droid's head clean in half as it rushes around the corner. It disappears back into the sim, and the next one follows it not a second later, courtesy of Keith's sword to its chest. There's the sound of Lance's rifle going off. Keith counts 1, 2, as he ducks around the next corner. Here, the maze branches off into 2 directions, and he hesitates. "Right!" comes Lance's voice, sharp and certain. Keith listens. The soles of his shoes scrabble over pebbles, dust flying up behind him as he runs.
"Left! Then straight! Keep going until I tell you which turn to take!"
Lance's directions come rapid fire, and Keith doesn't even feel like he's the one controlling his body anymore. Lance tells him, take the second right, and he's already turning. Tells him, duck into that crack on your left, and he nearly gets a 4-inch gash on his arm trying to throw himself into the crevasse. He hears a stop, and freezes out in the open, no questions asked. Lance calls the shots, and damn does he call them! From his perch above, it's like his normally keen, eagle-eyed vision has leveled up to a godly skill. So, when he's got Keith still as a statue in the middle of the maze with a single word, completely vulnerable, he has a damn good reason for it! That reason is keeping Keith safely out of his line of fire as he shoots down 4 droids hunkered around the other side of the wall, ready for an ambush! When Keith runs by the heap of dissolving bats, he feels electric fire in his veins. If he grins any wider, his face might split. They are killing this! Halfway there, Mullet, keep it up! Lance calls out, bright and cheerful. You're coming up on a crossroads. Take the right again, straight for 2 turns, then left. 2 droids incoming! Keith takes those bots down, a quick dodge strike that wastes no time. A flare of blue 15 feet up, and he glances up at time to see Lance eliminating one that apparently planned on jumping Keith from a ledge above.
How far away is the end?
Keith yells. Right, straight for... How many turns? 3? I turn left on 3, right? No, Keith! Left now! He skids to a stop, backs up, and turns down the proper corner.
Sorry.
It's fine! Exit's pretty close! We've got 3 more hostiles up ahead! Go left and catch them around the next right! Lance fires into the maze up ahead. Took one out for you! You're welcome! Keith rolls his eyes and skewers the 2 droids at once on his blade.
Hey, you want some robot skewers?
He calls up to Lance. Cheeky! Lance makes gagging noises. Your jokes are lame, buddy! Just stick to the breading! Keith, did you program lava into this thing? Keith stops dead in his tracks.
What? No!
There's the sound of rock shifting underfoot, and Keith looks up to see that Lance has relocated closer. He's standing on a cliff to the left of Keith and staring down at something on the other side. Then why the hell is there a lava pit right in front of our red goal, man?
A lava pit?
Keith frowns up at him.
How am I supposed to get past that? How big is it?
See for yourself, it's on the other side of this wall! Keith peeks around the wall and gets blasted by a wave of heat, forceful and heavy. The entire stretch of the maze before him drops off a couple feet away into a crater of molten rock, churning and bubbling. He blanches, tries to remind himself that this is just a sim and he can't actually get burned to death.
I do not remember picking this option.
He mutters. Louder, he says,
I could climb past, maybe?
He eyes the cliff face for footholds. It's completely smooth. Also not something he remembers keying in.
Or not.
Jump! Says Lance. It takes a second.
You want me to what?
Keith asks, blank. Jump at the wall! Push off of it to the other side! Lance says confidently. When Keith looks up at him incredulously, he raises an eyebrow. You do it all the time, like it'd be your signature move if we were in an anime. You're always kicking things.
Anime. You know what? Never mind.
Keith runs a hand through his hair.
I've never cleared a distance like this before. It's covered nearly half the passage.
Lance snorts. Oh, like you haven't done worse. Cheryl told me about that time you used a geyser to launch yourself. Hold up. Lance's eyes flick to the side, barely needing to line up the shot before firing. Blue sparkles burst into the air just a few turns behind Keith. He blows stray hair out of his face and readjusts his grip. Keith swallows. Anyway, you'll make the jump for sure, Lance says firmly. His mouth is set into a stubborn line, and Keith viciously tamps down on the shock he feels over Lance's apparent certainty in him. That's something. He edges out, toeing the drop-off point. He runs his tongue along his teeth, deliberating. There's not much room for a proper running start, but if he pushes off at the edge here, where it stretches a bit farther, and if he hits that section of rock over there, it should be enough momentum to get him to the other. There are 2 coming up on you, Keith! You need to go now! Lose them in the pit! Lance yells, and he's got his rifle up and tracking. He shoots, curses. It's too low here! I can't shoot into the passages, and close range doesn't seem like a good idea. With you cornered in my lava, buddy, you need a jump! Keith backs up as far as he can go and shakes out his shoulders.
I still don't understand where the lava came from.
Lance rounds on him, exasperated. Keith, just jump!
Keith's already flying before he realizes it. Armed with nothing but his thin exercise clothes and his bayard, he throws himself at the canyon wall. There's a split second where he's hovering over boiling liquid fire, everything seeming frozen, and then he feels gravity pull on him. His heart rushes back up his throat and his arms windmill. He swears fervently under his breath as he manages to plant a foot on the rock and push off again. His ankle twinges slightly under the force, but Keith pays it no attention, eyes zeroed in on the boundary separating lava and dirt. He's falling a curved downward slope, and between one heartbeat and another, he knows he's jumped too short. He's not gonna make it! Crap, we're gonna fall. This is gonna ruin the whole bonding experience, Keith thinks glumly, and I tried so hard too. Just as he resigns himself to a failed sim and an awkward ending to what was a damn good team effort, he hears, "Keith! Grab my hand!" Instinct, like lightning, has him throwing out his arm blindly. He almost can't believe it when he feels cotton and skin sticky with sweat. Lance latches onto his forearm like a sleep-deprived Shiro with his morning coffee, nails digging in and eyes wild, and before Keith can blink, uses the momentum to fling Keith the rest of the way over. His feet touch safe ground and he falls into a roll, sliding to a stop a few feet away from the edge. All that goes through his head is, "What the fuck?" He stares up at Lance, crouched on the cliff and panting. "Did you just throw me?"
he asks, dumbfounded.
Lance's chest heaves. He looks at his hand,
Looks at Keith, and grins. "Just tossing out the trash?" Keith closes his eyes.
"Seriously, Lance?"
"What? It worked, right?"
Keith jerks to the side and a sword embeds itself into the rock by his head. A lock of hair flutters to the ground. Lance swears, his rifle back in his hands and muzzle already smoking as he fires at the two droids across the lava pit. They throw themselves out of the way, the blast fire skimming their heads, and Lance growls. Grabbing the Altean sword by the handle, Keith rips it out of the stone with a grunt and hurls it back at a bot with extreme prejudice. It gets nailed in the head with enough force that it goes flying back and knocks into the other bot before disappearing. Lance picks off the other one, and without a word, the two of them turn back to the goal at hand. Lance jogs alongside Keith up on the canyon's walls, and his directions are short, focused. They're almost at the end. Keith can feel it.
"How many more droids?"
he asks. "Weren't those the last ones?" Lance grunts. "I wasn't keeping count. Exit's dead ahead, by the way. Just take one more left turn and we're good."
"Don't jinx it."
Keith peeks around the corner, switching his blade to his other hand to shake out his right, flexing the fingers idly. The coast is clear, and about a dozen paces away, the canyon walls give way to plain desert. They exit. Simulation complete, mission accomplished. He jogs forward, hearing Lance do the same. And then from a hiding place in the rocks, a droid bursts out, its blade in a lethal downward swing. "Keith!" He barely manages to dodge. The tip of the sword kisses his sternum, cotton splitting smoothly under razor-edge metal. He twists away, hops backwards, and catches his breath. Too close. Inhale, and he darts in. The bot brings up his sword, but Keith leaps into the air and throws his blade. His opponent reacts too late, expecting a physical clash, but only getting a sword hurled clean through its neck. Landing with a hand on the ground, Keith blinks the sweat out of his eyes. When he stands, blood rushes in his ears and his tongue feels dry and too big for his mouth. His bayard stands rooted in the soil in its sword form for a second before reverting back. He walks over and picks it up, strapping it back onto his belt.
"God damn, Red!" Lance says. "Whatever the jugular... Ruthless!"
Red? Keith thinks. Was that a... Did he give me a nickname? A nice one? Out loud he says the guy picking them off with a shit-ain't-a grin on his face. He glances over when he hears dirt falling. Lance is climbing back down. Here the cliff face is only 8 feet higher than Keith, and Lance is ambling up to him in seconds. "Don't think I didn't see you shoot down 2 with one shot and then cackle right after." Keith continues. "How'd you get it to pass through the bot's armor to hit the one behind it like that anyway?" Lance slings an arm around his shoulders.
"Again! Figured out the joint on the hip isn't thick enough to stop a blast from coming out the other side if it's hit right. But let's actually cross the finish line before another one jumps out at us again."
They step past the boulders to either side of them. The purple desert and green sky flicker once, twice, and then fades back into gray ship walls. The huge towers of metal that Lance ran around on slide back into the gaps in the walls. Turning around, they spot red words blinking up in the center of the room. Sim completed.
We did it! Lance says, almost in disbelief. Keith, we did it!
Keith looks over at him.
He thought that was obvious.
Yeah, I know.
We didn't even argue all that much, Lance says, hand coming up to his mouth. He stares up at the words unseeing. Oh my god, I told you to jump over lava and you listened!
Of course I did.
Lance puts his hands on his head. He looks like a man that's just been told the earth was flat this entire time. We took out 20 robots! The two of us! Can you believe that?
Yeah, I was there.
If this was a real mission, we would have totally kicked its butt! Lance laughs. Dude, we make such a good team! Keith freezes. Good team! His mind screams. He said it again. He said, good team! Shut up, he thinks. Jesus Christ, shut up! He's so preoccupied by his thoughts that when Lance says, high five! And thrusts his hands out, Keith ends up backpedaling, startled. Lance immediately droops, arms falling slightly. There's a furrow between his brows. Oh, sorry! No, wait, yes! Keith shouts and hurriedly throws his hands out too, smacking them against Lance's way too hard because they both go racking back on their feet. Keith's face goes blank.
Sorry, I wasn't expecting...
They stare at each other, Lance with his hands still up, and Keith with a slowly reddening face until Lance slaps a hand over his mouth. Keith narrows his eyes.
You're laughing at me.
I'm not, says Lance muffled. He shakes his head. Keith sees the way his eyes crinkle when he starts smiling, though, and how his shoulders tremble. Keith's mind babbles something about sparkles and eyes and sapphires, but he forcibly puts those thoughts out of his head.
You're totally laughing at me,
he says, and even he hears the note of whining in his voice.
Come on, Lance, I didn't mean to do it so hard.
Lance snorts loud and ugly, and that sound of his own making sends him over the edge. He dissolves into violent convulsions that has him bent at the knees, gasping and choking on laughter. Keith sighs. Sorry, Lance says after a minute. He glances up at Keith, and his lashes are wet, mouth stretched wide in an unrestrained grin. Keith quirks an eyebrow at him, and he doesn't even last a second before bursting back into snorts and giggles. This should offend Keith, but really, he just feels an immense sense of satisfaction. His mouth twitches, and feeling mischievous, he reaches out and wiggles his fingers under Lance's armpit. Keith! Lance shouts, scampering away with his arms wrapped around him. Dude!
What?
Keith asks innocently.
You look like you were having a great time laughing at me. Just thought I should help out some more.
Lance's nose scrunches up. Keith thinks he might be trying to look menacing, but it just kind of reminds him of an angry puppy. You!
Me.
Keith says agreeably, smirking. Oh, it's on, Ren! Lance growls. It's on!
Bring it.
He cocks his head, eyeing Lance from behind his hair.
Blue.
That pulls a delighted bark of laughter from Lance right before he launches himself at Keith, grinning.
So, how'd the training attempt go? Pretty good. We completed it, and Alora was honestly shocked when she reviewed the footage.
Nice!
See, I told you. All you needed to do was follow Lance's lead, and it'll all work out. But he laughed at me after, so I tickled him, and then we kicked each other around the room for a bit.
Keith! After that, Lance never turns down Keith's offers to train together. It's like a dam breaking. All of a sudden, their dynamic gets flipped on its head. Oh, sure, the jostling and snarking is still there, but Lance doesn't go out of his way to make things annoying for Keith. This, in turn, makes it 100 times easier for Keith to understand him. It's easier for him to pick up on Lance's jokes and humor when they aren't sarcastic quibs that has him mistaking them for criticism. Easier to talk when Lance seems to finally get that Keith isn't being deliberately obtuse. Instances of them fighting become practically non-existent, replaced with good-natured ribbing and overzealous sparring.
The first time he and Lance walk into a room sporting bright bruises on their bodies, it takes 20 minutes to explain to Shiro that no, they just came from practice, honest. No, we weren't just beating each other up. Yes, this was safe, sane, and consensual. Why are you laughing, Shiro? I'm just answering your question. They don't become instant best buddies. Hunk and Lance still spend most of their time together. But now he and Lance have common ground. He's so grateful to Hunk for his advice that he sat through 5 tastings of experimental food recipes and scrubbed Yellow's exterior clean enough to sparkle. Wow, Hunk says when Keith finishes. I'm not sure a 15-minute therapy session deserved this. You don't understand, Keith says, skin streaked with grease and hair a complete mess. He said we were a good team. He called me Red. He shakes the rag in his hand for emphasis. Alrighty then, Hunk says. Thanks for your help, man, but you should go get cleaned up. Dinner's in 15 and you might scare the others looking like that. He walks away before Keith can blurt out that Lance would just find it hilarious, and he laughed loudly, and his eyes would scrunch closed like a cat, and... Actually, maybe he'll shower later. All clear, says Lance. Keith breathes out. The fabric of his suit shifts soundlessly under his hands as he readjusts his grip and follows Lance into the wide open room, watching the rear with his sword up and ready. The mission objective better be here, or I'm going to shoot someone, Lance says idly. I sure hope you do, says Keith. It's your job. The door slides shut as soon as Keith steps through, and he pivots, heading straight for the lockers nearest to them. Lance falls back a step to Keith's right and looks around the room. I'm not getting paid enough for this to be a job! Lance raises an arm, and the map flickers into existence. Also, if this room doesn't have the objective, we've got 3 other places we can check. You're not getting paid at all, though I would have thought the endless parades and celebrations in your name would have been enough. Keith skims the locker designations. XI-32, XI-34, 36, 38, 40, and there, XI-42. Raising his bayard, he slashes an opening through the metal until he sees a glimpse of the plain brown package they've been looking for. Score. Behind him, Lance sighs. Was that really necessary? We could have used Paige's cool little hacker tool to unlock it. Keith reaches into the compartment and takes out the package, heedless of the brown paper tearing on jagged metal. He throws it to Lance, who stuffs it in the bag slung over his shoulder. That was faster. Lance just gives him a look. Keith shrugs and knocks an elbow into Lance's arm. I didn't get to use my bayard at all this time. Can't you let me wreck some flimsy metal in peace? I didn't use mine either. That's a good thing. They're not supposed to know we're here. Stealth mission, remember? Lance says dryly as they slip out of the room as quietly as they entered. Plus, Corinne's gonna lecture us. Worth it, Keith replies and taps Lance on the shoulder. He hears footsteps. Lance nods, the light-hearted curl of his mouth falling away. They press themselves into the shadows of the walls, Keith taking point in case of a confrontation. The footsteps round the corner, and with how close they're standing, Keith feels more than hears the steady breath that Lance takes, a rise and fall of his chest that has their shoulders brushing together. Keith leans out, a single eye peering from behind the bulkhead to see the purple glow of a sentry in the corridor ahead of them. There's a mechanical whir, and the sentry comes to a stop, head swiveling around. Keith jerks his head back. A pause, where seconds seem like hours. And then the clanking steps start up again, fading farther away. Lance sighs, a puff of air that Keith thinks would have ruffled his hair if the helmet wasn't in the way. It's a completely useless thought that nevertheless makes him flush. He frowns. Now is not the time. Keith! Keith jerks a little, sword instinctively rising into position before he registers the bemusement in Lance's voice. He lowers his arms and clears his throat. Come on, this way, he says, glad that his helmet covers his burning ears. They make their way down the corridors, silent and in sync, watching each other's blind spots. Keith tries not to feel too pleased that words aren't needed, that he can read Lance's face better than before, that he can see a shift in stance and know exactly what Lance needs him to do, where Lance needs him to be. Their training these past weeks is paying off.
They're jogging down the last corridor, and the endpoint is right ahead of them, where the doors open wide enough to see Red and Blue's paws beyond. Keith picks up the pace. He's just about to turn back to Lance with a grin when there's a sharp whine of a gun firing, a flash of blue at the corner of his eye, and then a sentry drops to the ground a few paces ahead of him. It makes a clattering thud that leaves only a stunned silence behind. Keith's mouth hangs open slightly. Lance's gun is still smoking when Keith looks over his shoulder at him. He lowers it slowly, staring back at Keith with his blue eyes. "Holy crap," says Keith. His mouth stretches up into a wide smile. "Holy crap, Lance, that was amazing." From behind the blue faceplate, a blush edges up Lance's neck. He steps up beside Keith, hands drifting over his rifle absently. "Yeah?" "You know it." Keith lightly punches Lance on the arm, barely a tap. They're both grinning widely. "Come on, let's finish this." It barely takes them 2 seconds to cross the threshold into the next room, and as they do, their surroundings dissolve back into a familiar training room, the walls and floor littered with familiar dents and scratches and scorch marks. Automatically, their eyes flash up to the timer blinking in red above them, and then to the control room where the rest of the team stands. "Congratulations on completing the simulation, Lance," Keith says Allura through the mic. There's pride in her voice. "You beat your last record by a landslide." "Did we beat Hunk and Pidge?" Lance asks eagerly. "By our 2.5 says Garan. "Yes! Team Purple!" Lance yells. He holds his hands up, and Keith barely hesitates now at smacking their palms together. Hunk narrows his eyes down at them, and Pidge slumps back in her chair with a huff. "Took you months, though! You guys kept arguing!" she mutters. Lance just makes a face at her, smug, but Karan clears his throat. "However, slicing up that locker was not an action I'd give you points for. It could have been armed with a sensor, or the enemy could see it and know there was an intruder. Alarms would raise." Lance slaps a hand over his eyes and drags down his face. "Aw, Keith, see? Don't say it." Keith folds his arms across his chest, staring Lance down. "Told you so!" Lance sings, unrepentant. Keith's eye twitches, and with a growl, he lunges for Lance's side. He misses, hands only managing to skim the black suit, as Lance throws himself backward with a shout. "Ha ha! Miss me!" Lance puts a hand on his hip, the other pointing imperiously at Keith. "You trying to do that way too much is protect Whoa!" Keith straightens from his crouch with a smirk. Lance stumbles to a stop a couple feet away, having just barely managed to dodge him the second time. "Predictable, huh?" "You wanna go, Red?" Lance falls into a defensive position, bouncing on the balls of his feet. He beckons to Keith with his hands. This is familiar ground, yeah. They've been doing this since they met. But Keith grins, wide and unabashed, because it's different, too, since he invited Lance to spar that one day. The competitiveness is tinged with something brighter, lighter, and it's heavy! He feels addicted! And then from the intercom comes Shiro's voice, distant, like he's turned away from the mic. They're gonna be at this for a while. Could you pass the popcorn, princess?" Shiro sidles up to him in the hall later, smirking, and Keith wonders why he decided to leave his knife and Bayard back in his room when this is clearly enemy territory. "Team Purple? Red?" Shiro asks. "When did that happen?" "Shut up, Shiro," Keith hisses. Don't you have leadery things to do? Maybe with aliens? Shit talking about black about Zarkon's stinky feet or something? Go away." "First of all," Shiro clamps his Gulra hand down on Keith's nape, which completely ruins Keith's chances of bolting. He's been taking advantage of the tech since he figured out Keith couldn't squirm away like he used to. "Black says Zarkon's feet were fine, but his hands were too sweaty." "Ugh, I was just joking, Shiro. I don't want to know." "Second," Shiro continues brightly, "Commander Iverson said to look out for you." Keith lets out a furious noise. "We are in literal space. None of that matters anymore. We aren't in the garrison. And you were promoted to the same rank as Iverson before you were abducted, so his orders don't matter anyway." Shiro frowns, exasperated. "Don't be like that. This was an important assignment given to me, and I'll complete it to the best of my ability, even as a former commander of the Galaxy Garrison."
Shiro, please stop, for the love of God, please.
Come on, cadet. First up, when do you and Lance get so chummy? You guys were practically play wrestling at the end there.
Shiro gives Keith's shoulder a little shake, but with the Galra robot hand, it just feels like he's being tossed around like a rag doll. He knows Shiro is doing this on purpose. He always handles Hunk's cookies like they're gold.
Oh, Laura thought it was really cute. Said it reminded her of baby Kearns or whatever.
Keith puts his head in his hands.
Could you just let me live? Just this once.
From down the hall, the sound of footsteps echo. They look up to see Lance, waving a hand.
Keith? Shiro? What are you guys doing? Oh, speak of the devil,
Shiro says. He smiles. It is the smile of Keith's nightmares.
Lance, hey!
Keith panics, wrenching away from Shiro's grasp to blurt frantically,
"Janitor's closet."
Shiro gives him a bewildered look, but Lance starts sprinting at them, the cheer falling from his face to be replaced with dead-eyed seriousness. He's staring straight at Keith, and it's kind of hot, but also freaky, and beside him, Shiro has enough time to whisper,
"What the heck?"
before Lance swoops in and yanks Keith by the wrist, pace not even slowing even a bit.
"Sorry, Shiro! I need it for something lecture later."
He gives a salute, and Keith tries so hard not to feel like he's a princess being rescued, but Lance is grinning, and he's so weak for that. Far behind them, he hears Shiro sigh.
"But I wasn't even..."
That night, Keith sits in bed and absently applies the rash cream to his left arm. The itch has spread slowly over the months, and Corinne had been at a loss to the reason, but it seems the cream keeps it from burning too badly. He's stuck using it until they can find a better alternative. He spreads the milky white ointment from the crook of his elbow up to his bicep, staring unseeingly at the skin. Rubs the cream in and finds his mind wandering to the exact curve of Lance's smirk as he saluted Shiro, cheeky as ever, the firmness of his grip on Keith's arm, the sight of his broad shoulders as he ran in front of Keith. His mind plays over the cadence of Lance's voice when he said, "I need him," and the breathtaking concentration, the seriousness even for something silly like rescuing Keith from Shiro's torture. He thinks it over, and then replays the sim evaluation of that morning, and then every training session they've had for the past month. It makes him grin so hard, his cheeks ache. He only comes back to himself when he brings a hand up to hide his smile and gets a face full of pungent ointment.